She was just 3 months old. Not mine. My sister's. Left with me for a few days, they said. Just until Juliet got her head on straight. But that morning when my phone buzzed, I felt it in my chest before I even saw the screen. I was rocking Arya gently against me, her breath warm against my collarbone when the message came in. We've moved to Milan. Emptied the account. Good luck. That was it. No explanation. No goodbye, no plan. Just a baby in my arms and a 6-word bomb from my parents. I froze. For at least a minute, maybe more. Then I opened the Harper Family Emergency Net account, the one we had all contributed to. My parents. Me. Even Juliet once. The balance read 0. 3 days ago it had over $18,000. Now, not a cent. Arya stirred slightly in my arms. Her tiny fist rested near my heart. She didn't know that the people who shared her blood had just made a decision that would change both our lives. I kissed her head and whispered to the quiet room. Thanks for the heads up. I didn't cry. Not then. What I felt wasn't grief. It was gravity shifting. Like the floor had dropped out and I was still pretending to stand. They hadn't even waited for the weekend to end. I was supposed to watch Arya so Juliet could recharge in Sonoma or Santa Cruz or wherever she had gone this time. I didn't ask. They didn't tell. It was all vague. A short break. Some time to clear her head. That was the language Mom used. No one said Milan. No one mentioned draining our shared fund. And definitely no one mentioned disappearing like cowards in the night. I eased Arya into the portable bassinet beside the bed. Her cheeks were still pink from sleep. I stood and walked to the kitchen, past the bottle rack, the burp cloths, the diaper bag they left behind. Then I opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. Mom always mocked me for keeping paper copies. Said I was too nostalgic. But that night, ink and paper were the only things keeping me grounded. I found the most recent bank statement. As of 12 days ago, the Harper Family Emergency Net had a balance of $18,742.46. I'd checked because I was considering dipping into it to cover a surprise pediatrician bill for Arya when she had a rash 2 weeks back. I never touched it though. I knew better. That account was sacred, shared, built on good faith. I paid it the same reverence people pay churches. I tried calling Mom. Straight to voicemail. Then Dad. Same thing. Then, Juliet. The call rang twice before it cut. No voicemail set up. I sent a text. Just 3 words. Are you serious? It was marked as read within 30 seconds. No reply. I didn't bother following up. What was I supposed to say? Bring the money back. Come get your daughter. They wouldn't. I knew that now. Maybe I'd always known. I leaned against the counter, the fridge humming behind me, the kitchen half lit by the stove light. Bottles on the drying rack, the pink sleep sack still warm in the laundry basket, the pacifier on the floor from earlier. Everything around me belonged to someone else, and now it was mine by default. By morning I'd need to start sorting through paperwork, find Arya's insurance card if she had one. Call the clinic. Figure out if I needed to apply for temporary guardianship. I'd have to call my freelance editor and explain the delay. Again. But none of that could happen until daylight. Right now, all I could do was sit in the quiet and listen to a baby breathe. And I did. I sat beside her and watched her tiny chest rise and fall, and I waited for my hands to stop shaking. The weight of it all pressed against my ribs. The betrayal, yes, but more than that, the clarity. That they weren't coming back. Not for Arya. Not for me. Maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. Being the responsible one starts so quietly. It's picking up your sister from ballet because Mom's on a call and Dad's stuck in traffic. It's helping with science fair posters while your own backpack lies untouched in the corner. It's staying quiet so other people can shine. I used to think that made me strong. That being dependable gave me value. But over time, dependable turns into invisible. Juliet was all wildness and fire. Tears in parking lots. Tattoos on impulse. A dozen different majors before she landed on energy therapy and spiritual coaching. People called her luminous, magnetic. difficult in a way that made them lean in. She wasn't responsible, but she was adored. Me, I was the shelf. The one that held everything and didn't get noticed unless something fell. Mom used to call the Harper family emergency net our just-in-case fund. Contributions came from Mom's Etsy side hustle, Dad's consulting gigs, my editing checks. It started after Juliet's second hospitalization in college, just in case someone else needed support. That was the phrasing. Someone else. Not Juliet. Not again. Just someone. But I was never someone else. I was always the backup. The plan B. The one who didn't cost too much or cry too loud. The first time Juliet drained the account, it was for a healing retreat in Sedona. Transformative, she'd said. The second time, it was to relocate to Seattle to write a book that never happened. Each time, Mom shrugged. Dad frowned. I patched my broken windshield with duct tape and skipped a dental cleaning for the third year in a row. Now here we were. They'd left me with a 3-month-old, emptied the only safety net we had, and moved to Milan like it was a delayed honeymoon. No explanation, no plan. Just gone. I wasn't panicking. Panic implies surprise. This wasn't that. This was something colder. Sharper. I pressed my palm flat against the countertop. The surface was clean, cool, real. I needed something solid to touch because I had the distinct sense I was standing at the edge of a cliff no one else even acknowledged. Arya whimpered. I crossed the room and rested a hand on her chest. She settled. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But I knew this much: I wasn't calling them again. By 7 the next morning, Arya had already spit up on 2 different sets of pajamas and screamed herself purple during a diaper change. I hadn't slept more than 40 minutes at a time. My head pounded in that hollow way that meant I was dehydrated, underfed, and moving mostly on willpower and caffeine. I stirred the last scoop of powdered formula into lukewarm water and whispered a prayer that she'd drink it without fuss. She didn't. She cried, kicked, pushed the bottle away, then cried harder when I took it back. Eventually, she gave in, sucking in quick, angry gulps while hiccuping between breaths. I held her with one arm, the other scrolling through my inbox on my phone. The unread count was well into the double digits, most of it from clients I hadn't responded to in days. My job had always been flexible. Editing historical submissions for the Virginia Heritage Journal wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to cover groceries and rent if I took on enough assignments. The downside was that I worked as a contractor. No sick leave, no backup, no maternity clause. Just deadlines and invoices and silence if you fell behind. I glanced at the clock. 10:17. I had meant to email Clara, the lead editor, last night to explain why I hadn't turned in the annotated manuscript. I hadn't found the words. What do you say? Sorry, I missed the deadline. I was suddenly left with a 3-month-old and a financial black hole where my family used to be. I opened my laptop and tried to type while Arya dozed lightly on my lap, her body curled into a comma against my stomach. After 3 sentences, she woke up again and started fussing. I closed the laptop without saving. The words could wait. She couldn't. Around noon, I microwaved a cup of coffee I'd poured 4 hours earlier. It tasted like burnt hope. I drank it anyway, standing barefoot in the kitchen, rocking Arya in her sling with a soft bounce. The windows were open just an inch to let the spring air in. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked once, twice, then went quiet again. That afternoon, Arya developed a light fever. Not high, just enough to make her fussy and clingy. I stripped her down to her onesie, gave her a sponge bath, and held her until the heat in her tiny limbs faded. Then I realized I was almost out of Tylenol. The infant kind. I checked the cabinet, found an old bottle from Juliet, expired. I made a list. Formula baby Tylenol wipes. The essentials. I pulled out my wallet and counted $34 in cash. My checking account had a little over 100, most of which needed to go toward the electric bill. The thought of using my credit card made my chest tighten. I'd already floated too many expenses across too many months. That night, after Arya finally fell asleep for a full hour stretch, I stood in front of the bookshelf in the living room. My collection of early American historical texts took up the middle 2 shelves. Some were signed. Some were out of print. All had been gathered slowly, intentionally over more than a decade. I ran my fingers along the spines. A leather-bound first edition of the Chesapeake Conflict. A biography of the Cabell family annotated with marginalia by a UVA professor long deceased. These books weren't just valuable. They were mine. My quiet joy. My anchor. The next morning I boxed them up and drove to a second-hand bookseller near campus. The woman behind the counter was kind. She asked if I was sure. I said yes before I could change my mind. She gave me $120 in cash and a card with her name on it in case I changed my mind about the rest. I thanked her and walked out without looking back. That afternoon, I bought formula diapers, Tylenol, and a bag of coffee that wasn't on sale. I paid in cash and didn't flinch. When I got home, there was an email from Clara in my inbox. Camille, I hope everything's all right. We had to fill the position at the museum. I know things have been complicated lately, but please keep us updated on your availability. We'd still love to have you on smaller projects. I stared at the screen for a long time. That museum job had been my goal for years. A part-time research assistantship with the option to go full-time after 6 months. Flexible hours. Benefits. The chance to work directly with preservation archives. When I'd interviewed in February, Clara had told me it was between me and one other candidate. Apparently the other candidate had answered their emails. I closed the laptop and sat down beside Arya, who was cooing at the ceiling fan. Her eyes followed the slow rotation of the blades like it was magic. I brushed a bit of lint from her sleeve. Her fingers wrapped around mine without prompting. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel much, to be honest. Just a hollow ache somewhere behind my ribs where I used to store expectations. I had lost the job. I had lost my books. And I had gained a baby. Not in the way people usually mean it. Not with showers and scrapbooks and a nursery full of tiny socks. I gained her like someone inherits a piece of land with no deed, no fence, and no instructions. But she was mine now. In every way that mattered. Even if no one had asked me if I wanted her. That night I made a list of everything I needed to figure out by the end of the week. Guardianship, health insurance. A pediatrician who accepted Medicaid. If I qualified for assistance, if I needed legal aid again. I folded the paper and left it by the sink next to the clean bottles. Arya whimpered from the bassinet. I walked over, picked her up, and held her close. She smelled like soap and milk and something warm and alive. I whispered into the top of her head. We'll figure it out. I promise. The next morning, I found a small Dutch oven on the stoop outside my door, still warm beneath the lid. Tucked underneath it was a folded piece of paper written in a looping hand that was steady but deliberate. You're doing more than enough. No name, but I didn't need one. I looked across the hall, and just for a second the curtains in 2B shifted like someone had been watching, and then decided to give me privacy. I brought the pot inside and set it on the counter. Arya was still sleeping in her bassinet, her mouth slack, one arm thrown dramatically above her head like she was making a point, even in her dreams. I poured a cup of the broth and tasted it. Carrot potato, a hint of thyme. Simple, comforting. The kind of soup people make when they remember what it's like to be tired all the way through their bones. I hadn't spoken more than 5 words to Mrs. Aruza before. She was probably in her early 70s, always wearing those zip-up cardigans and loose house pants, her hair in a bun that never looked messy but never looked fussy either. We'd nodded at each other by the mailbox, maybe exchanged a comment about the weather. That was the extent of our relationship. And yet here was soup. Here was kindness, wordless and heavy-lidded, asking for nothing in return. Later that afternoon, while Arya napped on my chest, and I tried to highlight a paragraph in a manuscript without jostling her, I thought about the last time someone had done something for me without being asked. I couldn't come up with anything recent. Even before all this, I had been the one people counted on. The helper. The backup plan. The safe bet. I looked around my apartment. The sink was full of bottles. The laundry basket held more onesies than anything else. My couch was now more of a changing station than a place to relax, and yet for the first time in days I didn't feel like the walls were closing in. Arya made a soft gurgling noise and kicked one leg in her sleep. I pressed my lips to her forehead, breathing in that sweet milk and lotion scent that had become oddly grounding. Around 5, I heard a soft knock. When I opened the door, Mrs. Aruza stood there holding a folded quilt in both hands. No smile, no awkward explanation. She just held it out like it was a package she had been instructed to deliver. I took it carefully. "It's for a twin bed," she said. "Made it too small. Didn't fit where I wanted it." "Thank you," I said, unsure if I should say more. She nodded once. Then she turned and walked back to her apartment. The quilt was pale blue and cream-stitched in simple diagonal lines. I laid it over the back of the couch, then hesitated and brought it into the bedroom instead. Arya slept on it that night, tucked safely in her bassinet, and I liked knowing something handmade cushioned the world beneath her. The next few days were a haze of routines that never quite settled into predictability. Arya's sleep came in bursts, unpredictable as rain. I learned to cook with one hand and type with 2 fingers. I answered emails at 3 in the morning, submitted invoices while bouncing on the balls of my feet to keep her calm. I spilled milk, forgot to shower, burned toast, but in between the chaos were these soft moments. Arya gripping my thumb with impossible determination. Her open-mouthed baby grin when she recognized my voice. The way she'd settle instantly whenever I sang badly off-key to the same lullaby I remembered from childhood. And there was always the quilt, folded neatly by the bassinet. A small reminder that someone had noticed. That I wasn't invisible, at least not to everyone. One evening I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, trying to annotate a dense essay on the architectural history of tobacco barns in Southern Virginia. Arya was finally asleep in her sling, her breath slow and even against my chest. The email I had to write was overdue. My editor had been patient, but I could feel that patience thinning with each passing day. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keys, and then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the Notes app and started a new entry. A kind of journal. Today Mrs. Aruza brought me soup. And a quilt. She didn't ask questions, she didn't stay, just gave and left. It was the kindest thing anyone's done for me in a long time. Arya laughed at the sound of the vacuum. I got through a whole manuscript with her sleeping on me. I haven't showered in 2 days, but I'm still standing. I paused, then added one more line. Sometimes the kindest people are the ones who don't knock first. I hit save, closed the laptop, and leaned back in the chair. The house was quiet except for the gentle hum of the fridge and the faint creak of the old floorboards settling. Arya sighed in her sleep. And for the first time since all of this began, I didn't feel entirely alone. I told myself I was just going for the formula. One last container of the brand Arya tolerated best. That was the reason. The only reason. I strapped her into the car seat, folded up the quilt Mrs. Aruza had given us, and placed it over her legs like a shield. The drive to my parents' house was only 12 minutes, but it felt longer. Every red light gave me more time to debate turning around. The house sat just off Langdon Avenue, the same white brick with forest green shutters I'd known since middle school. The lawn was trimmed, the mailbox still held a crooked dent from when Juliet backed into it senior year. Nothing had changed. Not from the outside. I parked in the driveway and carried Arya in her car seat up to the porch. The spare key was still under the ceramic frog. That too hadn't changed. Inside, the silence hit me harder than I expected. Not the peaceful kind. The other kind. The kind that feels like a door was shut long before you arrived. The air smelled faintly like lemon polish and old coffee. But it was missing the undercurrent of something living. No music from the kitchen speaker, no laundry going, no hum of the dishwasher. Just stillness. I placed Arya's carrier near the hallway and made my way toward the kitchen. The fridge was nearly empty. Half a bottle of Prosecco, a jar of imported fig jam, and a single stick of butter. The kind of things you don't throw away but don't plan to use again either. The pantry had been cleaned out. Even the oatmeal Mom always hoarded was gone. I opened the cabinet, saw the rows of clean dishes lined up like they were waiting for company that would never come. The counter was bare except for a sticky note near the phone base. Cancelled cable. Please return modem. Not addressed to anyone, just information left behind like a receipt. I went to the laundry room, hoping maybe they'd left the formula somewhere obvious. Nothing. Just empty baskets and the scent of dryer sheets, long gone stale. I ended up in the study. My father's desk was cleared except for one folder. Not labeled. Just tucked under a manila envelope. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a neatly organized set of documents. Travel itineraries. 2 one-way tickets from Dulles to Milan dated nearly 6 weeks before they left. A rental agreement for an apartment in Brera, one of the most expensive districts in the city. Italian SIM cards still in their packaging. A welcome letter from a relocation agency addressed to Sandra and Robert Harper. I sat down slowly. There was nothing impulsive about any of it, no emergency. No last-minute scramble. This was not a reaction. It was a plan. Beneath the stack of travel documents was a notarized form. I recognized the layout before I read the words. A temporary transfer of legal guardianship. Camille Harper listed as the guardian for Aria Elena Harper, age 3 months. My address. My phone number. My supposed signature. But I never signed it. I pulled the paper closer and studied the name at the bottom. My name. In cursive I hadn't used in years. A line too neat. Too even. It was a forgery. Clean. Confident. Someone had practiced. I flipped to the last page in the folder. A bank statement dated 2 days before they vanished. The Harper family emergency net account showing a single outgoing wire transfer of $21,400 to Meridian Trust Private International Division. The routing code linked to an overseas branch. I stared at the numbers. The rest of the statement was blank. No other withdrawals. Just one clean sweep. I stood up too fast. The chair scraped against the hardwood, the sound startling in the quiet. They hadn't just left. They had removed every possible trace of obligation. They had forged my name, taken the money, and built a life somewhere picturesque with espresso and cobblestones and not a single diaper in sight. Aria began to fuss from the hallway. I walked back and picked her up, pressing her small body against mine. Her cheek rested on my collarbone, her whimpers fading into shallow breaths. I sat on the living room couch and looked around. This was the house where I'd learned to read. Where I'd eaten cereal while watching Saturday morning cartoons. Where I'd sat at this exact coffee table to help Juliet glue rhinestones to her homecoming dress while Mom told us we had different kinds of beauty. And now it was a shell. A holding space for secrets. I looked at Aria. They didn't even leave a note for you. I kissed the top of her head and whispered into her hair. You are not disposable. She shifted, making a soft sound in her sleep. I stood holding her tight and walked out without taking anything else. Not the formula, not the framed photos still hanging by the stairs. Not even the spare diapers I knew were stashed under the guest bed. Some things were better left untouched. Outside, the sun was beginning to set behind the oaks lining the street. I buckled Aria into her seat and watched her eyelids flutter as the engine started. On the drive home, I didn't cry. I made a list in my head. Not of things to do, but of truths. They didn't leave in a panic. They didn't forget. They had made a decision. And they had forged mine to do it. The next morning, I called the Eastport Legal Aid Center and got a walk-in appointment for the afternoon. It was the only place that would see me without charging up front. I fed Aria, changed her into a soft onesie with tiny lemons on it, and packed her diaper bag like I was going into battle. Wipes, bottles, a folder with every document I had found, and a flash drive with screenshots of text messages. I didn't know what would matter, so I brought everything. The office sat in a weathered brick building between a check cashing place and a shuttered bakery. A metal plaque near the door read Rhodes and Associates Pro Bono Division. I pushed it open, the bell overhead, barely audible over the hum of the old radiator. The receptionist, a young woman in a maroon turtleneck, smiled as I stepped in. You must be Camille. You can go right in. Third door on the left. Mr. Rhodes is expecting you. Aria stirred in my arms but didn't cry. She had that quiet look she wore when she sensed my nerves. I kissed her forehead and walked to the office where the door was open. Inside sat a man in his early 50s with thick glasses and a salt and pepper beard. He wore a navy sweater and no tie. His desk was cluttered but not messy. Law books, sticky notes, a half-eaten granola bar. He stood when he saw me. "Miss Harper. I'm Ephraim Rhodes. Please sit wherever you're comfortable." I settled into the chair across from him and rested Arya's carrier beside me on the floor. "She might wake up." "That's perfectly fine." He smiled, then leaned forward. "So I've had a chance to skim the intake notes. You brought some documents with you." I opened the folder and slid it across the desk. He didn't speak for a while, just read through the travel papers, the forged guardianship form, the bank statement. When he reached the signature page, he narrowed his eyes and tapped the paper twice with his finger. "Have you ever signed any legal transfer of guardianship?" "Never. Not even discussed it." He nodded slowly. "This is an illegal document. Whoever submitted this knowingly presented a forged consent form. That alone is a serious offense. But combined with the financial withdrawal and sudden disappearance, it raises more red flags." He flipped to the back page of the folder and set it down gently. "You mentioned on the phone that you have reason to believe they intended to abandon your daughter permanently." "Yes. I have messages. From my sister. I have them saved. I can show you." He opened his laptop and turned it toward me. "If you could forward them to this email, I'll include them in the initial documentation. Time and date stamps are important." I pulled out my phone and began forwarding every relevant screenshot. The cheerful check-ins from Juliet. The photo of a glass of wine in Venice. The message that read, "Let me know how she's doing when you get a sec." Nothing that indicated any plan to return. Nothing that even mentioned the word custody. When I looked back up, Ephraim was already typing. "We're going to file an emergency petition for full and permanent guardianship. Given the circumstances and the paper trail, I believe a judge will approve it swiftly. But we'll also initiate an investigation. This goes beyond neglect. This may qualify as custodial interference and financial misconduct. What happens if they come back?" He looked at me not unkindly. "Then they'll have a lot to answer for." I sat back, letting the words settle. The overhead light buzzed faintly. Arya shifted in her seat, smacking her lips in her sleep. Ephraim leaned forward. "Forgive me for asking, but I need to cover every angle. Did you ever give them verbal permission to take your daughter abroad? Number? I didn't even know they had passports. And did they ever mention to you in any form that they would be gone long-term? Number? They told me they were going on a short trip. A break. They said I needed time to rest, and they'd bring her back in 2 weeks." He wrote that down carefully. "We'll include that in the sworn affidavit. And the timing of the wire transfer helps us. It shows intent to relocate. You're doing the right thing, Camille." I wasn't sure what the right thing even felt like anymore. All I knew was that I couldn't let this be treated like some family misunderstanding. As I stood to leave, Ephraim handed me a copy of the petition to review. "You'll receive a court date soon. In the meantime, if you hear from them again, forward everything. No contact, no responses. Document it all." I nodded and picked up Arya's carrier. She was still asleep, one fist curled near her cheek. "Thank you," I said. He smiled gently. "You're not alone in this. Let the system do what it was built to do." As I stepped outside, the wind had picked up. The sky was the color of wet stone. I zipped Arya's blanket higher and headed to the car. Inside, I sat for a long time before starting the engine. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was playing defense. I had put something in motion. And the papers I carried now weighed more than milk. The phone rang while I was changing Arya's diaper on the floor of the nursery. I glanced at the screen and froze. Juliet. I wiped Arya clean, fastened the diaper, and gently placed her in the bassinet. Then I picked up the phone, stepped into the hallway, and pressed record on the second phone I had resting on the kitchen counter. "Hi, Camille." Her voice was tight-clipped. "You're really doing this?" I leaned against the fridge, staring at the rust spot near the bottom of the door. "Doing what? Don't act like this is some surprise." "You agreed." I didn't say anything. "You said you'd take care of her." I agreed to a few days. "That's what you said." A short break. 2 weeks tops. It's been 5. You emptied the account and sent me no forwarding address. She gave a low, bitter laugh. There you go again. Making everything dramatic. You always did know how to turn a moment into a scene. I felt heat rise up my chest, but kept my voice steady. You disappeared, Juliet. You didn't just leave Arya. You erased yourselves. A long pause. Then she sighed. We needed time. You should be thanking us. You're finally forced to step up. It's not like you ever had to before. I let the silence speak for me. You think this makes you some kind of martyr, she continued. Maybe you like pretending this baby is yours. Maybe that's always been your fantasy. I ended the call without another word. The recording saved automatically. I uploaded it to the same secure folder Ephraim had told me to use and labeled it 1123 AM. Call from Juliet. Then I set my phone down, picked up the baby monitor, and walked back into the nursery. Arya was making soft cooing sounds, her legs kicking aimlessly in the air. I kissed her forehead and whispered that she was safe, then stepped out and closed the door behind me. The house felt quiet in a way that scratched at my nerves. I needed something to do, something to ground me. I decided to clean the study. It was the one room I hadn't really touched since everything fell apart. I pulled the curtains open, letting sunlight spill across the hardwood floor. A thin layer of dust had settled on the bookshelves. I started from the top left, removing each book, wiping it, then replacing it. Some titles I hadn't touched since college. Political theory, philosophy, a few poetry collections from when I thought I'd be a writer. Near the bottom shelf behind a stack of old university journals I found it. A small envelope yellowed slightly at the edges with my name written in Juliet's handwriting. Camille. Spring 2010. I sat down on the floor and opened it carefully. The letter inside was handwritten in blue ink. Her script was neat back then, loops and tails formed with precision. Camille. You didn't have to help me. You didn't have to lie to Dean Walsh or cover for me, or let me crash on your dorm couch for 2 weeks. But you did. You always do. I don't know how you manage to love me even when I mess up everything. I owe you more than I can ever say. You saved me. Love, Juliet. I stared at the page for a long time. I had forgotten about that spring. She had been caught in a plagiarism scandal. Her boyfriend had cheated on her and leaked her essays out of spite. She nearly lost her scholarship. I had pulled every string, convinced the administration to give her another chance. She never faced public consequences. Now she was gaslighting me like I was the problem. I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. My hands were trembling, not from anger but something colder. The kind of cold that comes from realizing you've been used again and again by someone who remembers your kindness only when it suits them. I stood up, returned the envelope to the desk drawer, and locked it. Not out of sentiment but preservation. That letter was going in the file. When Arya cried out, I moved without thinking. Picked her up, rocked her gently, pressed her warm cheek against mine. She didn't choose this, but I was going to choose her. Every single day. The doorbell rang. I turned my head sharply, heart suddenly pounding. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the front window and peered through the curtain. No one stood there. But an envelope had been slid under the door. I picked it up slowly. There was no return address. Just my name scrawled in that same familiar handwriting. Juliet. My stomach knotted. I opened it expecting venom or manipulation. Inside was a single photograph. Arya asleep in Juliet's arms. The background was some cafe in Milan. On the back in the same blue ink it said, "Remember who raised her first." I dropped the photo onto the counter and backed away. This wasn't remorse, this was a warning. And it wasn't going to work. The call came while I was folding laundry in the living room. Ephraim's name lit up the screen. I swiped to answer and put it on speaker. There's something you need to see. It just arrived. A scanned copy forwarded from a notary office in Milan. I paused mid-fold, a onesie still in my hand. What is it? A preliminary guardianship transfer document. It names Arya. I sat down. Hard. My knees didn't ask permission. He continued, careful but clipped. It appears your parents initiated an international adoption process. The intended recipients are a couple in Milan. My throat went dry. And they never told me number. And they used their own names as legal guardians. Not yours. But I'm the one with temporary custody. They can't just bypass that. That's where it gets worse. He hesitated. The document includes an affidavit stating that you are currently emotionally unstable and unfit for guardianship. Signed. Submitted. My mouth opened but nothing came out. The room started spinning. Who signed it? Your father. But the letterhead traces back to a firm in Naples, possibly fake. The date of the signature predates your formal guardianship filing here in Washington. They were trying to outrun your paperwork. I pressed a hand against my chest. Aria was asleep upstairs. The baby monitor blinked on the coffee table, her soft breathing steady. So they tried to ship her off, like furniture. There was a pause. That's exactly what this looks like. I closed my eyes. Is it legal? Not without your consent. Under Washington state law and given the emergency guardianship filing already on record, this violates multiple statutes. Fraudulent misrepresentation, attempted illegal transfer of custody, interstate interference. We can stop this, and if you choose to pursue it, we can sue. I didn't speak for a long time. Ephraim waited. Finally, I whispered. Thank you. Send me the full file. Already did. Check your email. And Camille. Yeah, this isn't over. Not by a long shot. He hung up. I sat there for a while, phone in my lap, watching the sunlight shift across the floor like time itself was trying to slip away from me. Then I got up, climbed the stairs, and opened the nursery door. Aria was curled up like a comma in her crib, cheeks flushed with warmth, her little fingers wrapped loosely around the edge of the blanket. It wasn't just any blanket. It was the quilt Aunt Aruza had sewn by hand back before Juliet ever got pregnant. Bright yellows and forest greens and tiny embroidered animals across the corners. I knelt beside the crib and gently brushed the edge of the quilt with my fingertips. They would not take her. Not by manipulation, not by lies, and certainly not by treating her like a transaction. I whispered more to myself than to her. No one is taking you from me. No one. She stirred, eyes fluttering open for a moment, then shut again. I stayed there until my legs went numb. Later that evening, I opened the email from Ephraim. Attached were PDFs of the document, the signature page, and a typed letter written by my mother stating that this was in Aria's best interest. No mention of me. Not once. The final attachment was a picture of the couple in Milan. Elegant, wealthy, smiling with perfect teeth in a sunlit courtyard. I could almost hear the pitch they gave my parents. A better life, European education, bilingual opportunities. As if any of that made up for love, for safety. For the nights I'd held Aria while she screamed from colic, the lullabies I hummed from memory, the pediatrician visits, the formula, trial, and error. I clicked download. Saved all the files. Labeled the folder Aria. Custody defense. Then I picked up the phone, opened a new message, and texted Ephraim. Let's go to court. I hit send. Then I shut the laptop. I went back upstairs, picked up Aria, and held her close. She didn't know any of this yet, but someday she would. And she'd know she was wanted. Every second. Every heartbeat. Every sleepless night. She'd know someone fought for her, and didn't flinch. It started with a knock that didn't sound rushed. Just firm. Calculated. The kind of knock you use when you already believe the person on the other side owes you something. I peeked through the window and felt my stomach sink. My parents stood side by side on the porch, dressed like they were attending a country club brunch, not showing up unannounced after abandoning their daughter's child. I didn't move for a moment. I just watched them standing there in their polished loafers and designer sunglasses like the past 2 months hadn't happened. Like they hadn't left the country with barely a text and sent back only silence in return. They knocked again. I opened the door. My mother's eyes scanned the interior as she stepped in. Her lips twitched downward when she caught sight of the baby bottle on the coffee table and a swaddle tossed over the arm of the couch. So this is how you've been living, she said flatly. My father followed her in a step behind, offering a nod like this was a casual visit. They didn't ask to sit, but my mother made her way to the dining table and pulled out a chair. She placed her purse down like she was declaring territory. She turned and gave me that familiar once-over, the same one she used when I brought home art projects in 3rd grade. I used to think it was scrutiny. Now I know it was disappointment preloaded. "Where's Arya?" she asked. "Napping," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "I hope you've been doing tummy time." Her head's already looking misshaped. It's not normal for a 3-month-old to have flat spots. I crossed my arms. She's been doing fine. Her pediatrician's happy with her progress. My mother clicked her tongue. Pediatricians say a lot of things when they think you're too emotional to hear the truth. I didn't respond. I walked to the bassinet near the window and adjusted Arya's blanket. The baby stirred slightly but stayed asleep, her tiny fists curled under her chin. Then I turned to face them. "Let's not waste time," I said quietly. "I've filed for legal guardianship. Full, permanent." The temporary emergency order was granted by a family court judge here in King County. "I have evidence of your intent to place her in a home overseas without legal clearance or my consent. That includes your communications with the couple in Milan, the forged signatures on the authorization letter, and the funds transferred under the name of a fake childcare trust." My father's shoulders slumped slightly. My mother didn't blink. "You're misinterpreting everything. That was an exploratory option. We hadn't decided anything yet." "I have the signed preliminary contract," I said. "The notary seal from Naples, the wire transfer receipts." "That's not exploratory. That's illegal." She narrowed her eyes. "Who gave you access to those documents?" "Your oversight," I said. "Or maybe you thought I'd be too overwhelmed with formula and sleepless nights to dig through your email backups." "You had no right." "I had every right," I said. "I've been taking care of her every single day since you walked away." My father stepped forward, his voice low. "Camille, we were grieving. You can't imagine what it was like losing Sadie. You were never a mother. You didn't understand the decisions we had to make." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something unfamiliar bloom in my chest. Pity, maybe. Or detachment. He wasn't the man who taught me how to ride a bike or stayed up late to quiz me before my calculus final. That man was gone. "I understand better than either of you," I said. "I was the one holding Arya when she wouldn't eat. The one calling the nurse hotline when she broke out in a rash. The one singing to her at 2 in the morning when she couldn't sleep unless I held her chest to chest. I didn't need to give birth to her to be her protector." My mother gave a clipped laugh. "That's rich. You're trying to hijack our granddaughter like she's some kind of charity project." I didn't answer. I walked to the counter, pulled a folder from the drawer, and placed it gently on the table in front of her. Inside are the filed motions, the notarized statements, the supporting evidence from Ephraim, the notarized nanny affidavit from Mrs. Aruza, and the emails from your Milan contacts, I said. "If you want to fight this in court, be my guest." My mother didn't open it. She looked at the folder like it smelled bad. "You think you can raise a baby on your own? You're freelancing for a startup. You haven't had a serious relationship in years. You don't have a husband or a proper home." I smiled, tight and tired. "Maybe not. But I have a heart and a spine, and right now those are the only qualifications that matter." My father shifted, uncomfortable. "Camille, please. We didn't mean for it to go this far, but it did," I said. "You left. You tried to rehome her. You didn't check in. You didn't even ask if she was okay. The only reason you're here is because the paperwork reached your lawyer and he warned you you'd be facing a court order." My mother stood, gathering her purse. "So this is it then? You're casting us out?" "No," I said. "You did that yourselves. I'm just not pretending anymore." Her eyes hardened. "You always were dramatic, and you always assumed I wouldn't push back." I walked to the front door and opened it. They didn't move for a second. Just stood there, caught between disbelief and pride. Finally, my father gave me a long look. One I couldn't read. Then he stepped out onto the porch. My mother paused on the threshold. "You'll regret this." I didn't reply. The door closed behind them. I turned and leaned against it, listening to the sudden quiet settle back into the house. The only sound was the white noise machine from Arya's room and the faint sigh of her breath. Upstairs, her nap was undisturbed. Down here, peace returned like a muscle finally relaxing after holding tension too long. I didn't cry, I didn't shout, I didn't need to. I had drawn the line. And this time I was the one who closed the door. The air in the house felt still, like everything had shifted an inch to the left and hadn't quite settled back into place. I walked into the kitchen, pulled a bottle from the warmer and fed Arya quietly in the half-light of the late afternoon. Her eyes fluttered open just long enough to recognize my face, then closed again as she drank, calm and trusting. That kind of trust did something to you. It wrapped itself around your ribs and made every breath feel heavier and more important. When she was done, I held her against my chest and stared at the stack of papers waiting on the counter. Ephraim had emailed me earlier asking me to print everything we discussed. Court filings, phone records, notarized affidavits, emails from the so-called adoption facilitators in Milan, bank records showing the overseas wire transfers. The evidence folder was growing heavier by the hour. I settled Arya into her bassinet and watched her sleep for a few minutes before I moved. Then I sat down at the table and started printing. Every text my mother had sent about the European opportunity. Every draft of the authorization letters I was never supposed to see. The transfer receipts were the most damning. They weren't small gifts, they were structured payments to a private agency. Enough to raise red flags even without context. I organized the documents into labeled tabs and slid them into a binder. It looked like something out of a corporate boardroom by the time I was finished. Tidy, professional, unforgiving. I was halfway through double-checking the court summons when a soft knock interrupted me. It wasn't the kind of knock that demanded anything. It was more like a question. I opened the door and found Mrs. Ellis from the floor below, her cardigan half-buttoned and a casserole dish wrapped in foil in her hands. She looked nervous and kind in that grandmotherly way that makes you wonder how much she sees through your walls. "I made chicken and rice," she said, eyes flitting behind me toward the living room. "Figured you might not have had a proper dinner in a while." I blinked, unsure what to say, and then stepped aside. She came in and set the dish on the counter without asking. Then she looked around the room like she was reading the energy before speaking again. "You've been holding it together real well," she said gently. "I see it. I hear it. These walls aren't as thick as you think." I smiled, exhausted. "Thank you." She sat at the edge of the couch, smoothing her skirt. "You know, my brother did something similar to me," she said after a moment. "When my daughter passed, I tried to adopt her little boy. But my brother, he always wanted control. He found a way to make it look like I was unfit. Had his lawyer twist my credit history, say I wasn't financially stable. Got the court to side with him. I lost my grandson." My chest tightened. "I'm so sorry." She waved it off. "It was years ago, but I still carry it. So when I saw those people outside your door today, I recognized the posture. The kind of arrogance that thinks love is measured by money or bloodlines. It's not. It's what you do when things get messy." I sat across from her, holding my breath. "I've seen how you care for her," she continued. "You talk to her like she understands every word. You light up when she laughs. You stay up all night and still smile at her in the morning. That's what counts." My throat felt too tight to speak. She reached over, patted my hand. "You're not alone, Camille. Don't let them make you think you are." We sat in silence for a few moments, the kind that feels like a blanket rather than a void. "I'm due in court tomorrow," I finally said. "I need someone I trust to watch her. Just for a few hours." She nodded before I even finished the sentence. "I'll bring her downstairs. I'll play music and show her pictures of my cat. We'll be just fine." Relief swept over me in a way I hadn't let myself imagine. I squeezed her hand and felt something crack open inside. Not weakness, just the release that came with knowing someone saw the weight you were carrying. After she left, I tidied the house more than necessary. Straightened the throw pillows, rewashed bottles that were already clean, folded and refolded Arya's onesies. Movement kept the nerves from spilling over. That night, when the baby was finally down and the house was dark except for the kitchen light, I sat at the table and opened a notebook. There was no lawyer asking me to write this. No judge demanding a statement. But I needed to. For myself. For her. I started slow. I didn't choose to be a mother, I wrote, but I chose not to walk away. I chose to wake up each day and meet her needs before my own. I chose to sing to her when I was exhausted. I chose to fight for her when others walked away. She is not a burden. She is not a replacement. She is not a pawn. She is a person. She is light and laughter and softness. She smells like warmth and the future. And I will protect her with everything I have. I paused, let the words settle. Then I added one more line. Love isn't something you inherit. It's something you show up for. I closed the notebook and pressed my palms against the cover. The house was silent. The clock ticked. Arya stirred and then quieted again. Tomorrow would be a battle. But tonight the air was calm. And in that stillness, I finally felt ready. The courtroom smelled faintly of floor polish and old paper. Fluorescent lights buzzed above the wooden benches, and the soft rustle of coats and briefcases was the only sound filling the space. I sat at the front beside Ephraim, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my shoulders squared in the blazer I had chosen carefully that morning. Not flashy. Not fragile. Just firm. The judge hadn't arrived yet, but the bailiff already stood by the door with his arms crossed, eyes scanning the rows like a sentry. Across from us, the opposing table remained empty. I checked the courtroom clock. 10 minutes to 9. Ephraim leaned slightly toward me and whispered without looking away from his notes. No matter what happens today, you've done everything right. His voice was low, measured. I nodded once, not trusting my own voice yet. Behind us, I could feel the weight of eyes. The gallery was almost full, not with press or strangers, but with people I didn't recognize and didn't need to. Family court didn't typically draw crowds. But today, somehow it had. At 9 o'clock sharp, the doors opened and Judge Lillian Hargrove entered with her clerk behind her. Everyone stood, then sat in practiced rhythm. She was tall, in her 60s, with silver streaks in her tightly curled hair and a face that had clearly spent decades listening to every excuse imaginable. Her gaze swept the room once, then settled on the empty seats across from us. Ephraim stood. Your Honor, the petitioner is present and ready. We are awaiting respondents Lorraine and Michael Whitaker. They have been served and confirmed receipt. The judge checked her docket. We will allow a brief window for arrival. 5 minutes. I watched the second hand on the courtroom clock make a full lap. And another. At 9:07 the door creaked. My parents entered, Lorraine first in a navy coat and oversized sunglasses she did not remove. Michael followed, adjusting his tie with a huff like he had just run a mile. They didn't look at me. Not once. They took their seats like this was some meeting they were obligated to endure, not a hearing about the child they'd tried to take. No, Juliet. The judge looked at them over her glasses. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Rowe, proceed. Ephraim stood again, steady and calm as ever. Your Honor, we submit that Camille Whitaker is the sole legal guardian of Arya Whitaker under the current temporary custody order. We are here today to request the court affirm permanent legal guardianship and revoke any claim of custodial interference by the respondents. He handed a thick folder to the clerk, who walked it to the judge. Included are documents showing an unauthorized wire transfer to an adoption intermediary based in Milan made from an account belonging to the respondents. Attached are emails, notarized statements, and certified translations of Italian forms bearing a forged signature. Additionally, we present notarized testimony from a witness attesting to verbal conversations with the respondents, expressing intent to remove the child from Miss Whitaker's care and relocate her permanently abroad. The judge flipped through the binder slowly. Her brow furrowed when she reached the bank records. She read in silence, then glanced at my parents. Do the respondents have representation? Lorraine opened her mouth, then closed it. Michael shook his head. We chose not to. Very well. She returned her attention to the binder. Miss Whitaker, do you have anything you would like to say? I stood, heart thudding. My voice came out soft at first, but it steadied. Your Honor, I didn't ask to be a mother. I didn't plan for this. But I have been there for Arya since the moment she came into my life. I feed her, care for her, take her to appointments, wake up every night with her. I love her. And more than anything, I want her to be safe. What happened wasn't about love. It was about control, and I won't let her become collateral in someone else's power game. I sat down again, hands still trembling slightly. I didn't look back at my parents. I didn't need to. Judge Hargrove closed the folder and folded her hands. I have reviewed the evidence and testimony. The documents clearly show attempts to transfer the child without consent. The financial records raise serious concerns. The forged signature is a felony offense and could warrant criminal investigation in another court. She turned to me. Miss Whitaker, this court finds in your favor. Full legal guardianship is hereby granted. All prior temporary orders are made permanent. The respondent's visitation rights will require review by Child Services before any future contact is allowed. Furthermore, the international wire transfer account is to be frozen pending further investigation. I didn't breathe. That is the ruling of this court. The gavel came down once, sharp and final. I exhaled slowly. Ephraim gave my hand a quiet squeeze. Behind us, the gallery remained silent. Not a clap, not a murmur. Just the hum of air vents and the scraping of Lorraine's chair as she stood abruptly and walked out without a word. Michael followed, still looking stunned, like someone had swapped the script mid-scene and no one had told him. I waited a few seconds before rising. Outside the courtroom, the hallway was almost empty. The marble floors echoed faintly as I walked toward the exit. Ephraim walked beside me but didn't speak. He didn't need to, Mrs. Ellis was waiting by the steps with Arya bundled up in a pale yellow blanket, her cheeks rosy from sleep. How did it go? She asked quietly. I smiled as I reached for my daughter. We're going home. Lorraine stood just outside the courthouse doors, her heels pointed toward the exit, but her eyes locked on me. As I stepped out into the sunlight, still adjusting to the glare and the weight of what had just happened, she moved into my path. You were always jealous of her. Her voice was calm, not angry, just hollow. Like someone rehearsing lines they'd convinced themselves were truth. And now you finally found a way to punish us. I didn't answer, not with words. I looked at her and saw not a mother but a woman who had gambled with a child's life and lost. And she still didn't understand why it mattered. Michael stood a few steps behind her, his hands buried in his coat pockets. He looked everywhere but at me. The man who once gave me my first telescope for Christmas now couldn't even meet my eyes. They left without waiting for a response, their footsteps clipped and even like people walking out of a parking ticket, hearing instead of a courtroom that had stripped them of custody rights. Their heads were high, their shoulders unbothered. No apology, no guilt, just silence, and something colder than shame. I walked the rest of the way in quiet. Mrs. Ellis had buckled Arya into her car seat already. As I opened the back door and peeked in, Arya turned her head and smiled with her whole face. The kind of smile that made your lungs loosen without you even realizing they were tight. I ran my fingers gently across her curls, soft and warm, and kissed the side of her cheek. Thank you, Mrs. Ellis, for everything. She waved it off with a kind laugh, then disappeared into her old Honda. Arya giggled at the sound of the door closing and kicked her little socked feet against the seat. On the drive home, I let the radio play softly. A jazz station out of Tacoma. The saxophone smoothed out the space between thoughts, filling it with notes instead of what-ifs. Arya hummed to herself in the back. I didn't cry, I didn't smile either. I just breathed. At home, I gave Arya a bottle and laid her gently in her crib. She reached up once as if to check I was really there, then let her hand fall back down as sleep found her fast. I watched her chest rise and fall for a while, letting it anchor me. Later, after I'd showered and changed into an old gray sweatshirt I used to wear in college, I walked out to the converted garage in the backyard. It was small and always a little drafty, but I had turned it into something that was mine. My wheel. My clay. My shelves of half-fired bowls and imperfect mugs with fingerprints forever baked into their curves. I sat down on the stool, tying my hair back lazily. There was still dry clay under my nails from the week before. I flicked on the soft yellow light overhead. The wheel waited. So did I. I reached for a lump of stoneware clay, cool and damp, and placed it at the center. I added a little water, felt it slide between my fingers, and started the wheel. Slowly at first, just enough to hear the hum. Centering clay takes patience. You press your palms in and wait for the wobble to still. It doesn't look like much is happening from the outside. But if you don't center it right, the entire piece collapses later. It's in the quiet where everything finds its place. As I worked the clay upward, shaping a shallow bowl, my mind drifted back to Lorraine's words. Jealous. Punish. Is that how she saw it? As some petty revenge fantasy spun out by the daughter she never quite chose. The daughter who never fit the dress, never matched the photo, never followed the path laid out neatly next to Juliet's. I didn't feel angry anymore. Just tired. I pressed my thumbs gently into the center, letting the bowl widen, my breath moving in rhythm with the spin. My hands moved without thinking now. Years of muscle memory had made this second nature. But tonight felt different. The clay didn't resist. It listened. I thought about the night I first brought Arya home. The way she looked around my apartment like it was the moon. Every creak of the floorboards made her eyes jump. The first bath. The first fever. The first night she fell asleep with her fingers wrapped around mine. And now she was mine. Not in some possessive way, but legally, permanently, rightfully. I shut off the wheel and stepped back. The bowl was lopsided, imperfect. But it was done. I didn't try to fix it. I washed my hands in the tiny utility sink, watching the water turn a cloudy gray before swirling down the drain. The clay under my nails would stay until morning, and that was fine. As I walked back toward the house, the night air smelled like pine and the last hints of rain. A wind chime clinked faintly by the porch. The lights in the living room were low, and Arya's soft breathing carried from the baby monitor on the counter. I stood by the window for a moment, looking out at the backyard, the fence, the shadows moving gently across the lawn. I didn't know what Lorraine or Michael would do next. Whether they'd try to appeal or just disappear into whatever social circles would still have them. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to prepare for their next move. Not tonight. Tonight I would sit on the floor beside Arya's crib. I would watch her sleep. I would sing a lullaby out of tune, and she would stir once, then settle. And when morning came, I would open all the windows. Let the air clear out the echoes. Let the house remember who it belonged to. Monday came quietly, like it didn't want to disturb anything that had finally settled. I unlocked the studio door just after 8, the same way I had hundreds of times before, but something in me felt new. Not polished or perfect, but like breath returning to lungs I didn't realize had been holding. Arya sat on a cushioned playmat near the corner, babbling softly at the fabric elephant dangling from her toy arch. I placed her favorite rattle beside her, then rolled up my sleeves and adjusted the height of the wheel. The light slanted through the front windows in soft stripes across the shelves, catching the edges of glazed bowls and unfinished mugs waiting for their turn in the kiln. It had been nearly 7 months since I'd opened the doors to customers. The shelves had gathered a fine layer of dust, but the space still smelled like clay, and warm wood still remembered the hum of hands shaping things that didn't exist before. I turned the sign in the window to open. By mid-morning, Mrs. Aruza shuffled in the scent of almond and vanilla trailing behind her. She wore her usual purple cardigan and had a small tin tucked under one arm. I heard about the hearing, she said, then didn't say anything else. Just walked over, pressed the tin into my hands, and squeezed my fingers. Her touch was dry, warm. Her eyes didn't ask questions. They never had. She leaned down to wave at Arya, who offered her a wet gummy grin. Then she left without another word. Inside the tin were oatmeal cookies, still warm. I ate one standing by the workbench, tears pricking unexpectedly at the corners of my eyes. Not from sadness, not even from joy. Just from the ache of being seen in a world that so often looked right through me. Around lunchtime, I received a message on the studio website. A student from Evergreen State College wanted a handmade set of bowls and small plates for her first apartment. She'd attached a note saying she liked the ones I used to make with speckled glaze and irregular edges. She said they felt like home. I reread her message 3 times, then replied that I would love to make them. It wasn't a large order, but it was the first in a long while. And it was mine. In the afternoon, I cleaned the shelves. I labeled the glaze jars. I rearranged the front display. I brewed a pot of mint tea and placed a small ceramic cup beside the register. The windows were open just enough to let in the wind. Arya had fallen asleep in her stroller, one arm flopped to the side like a tiny queen at rest. I found myself staring out the front window, watching the cars pass on the street. The neighborhood had shifted while I'd been gone. A new bakery had opened across the way, painted butter yellow with flower boxes in the windows. A couple passed by holding iced coffees and laughing like there was no such thing as a past. I stood there sipping my tea and let it all soak in. The silence. The hum of a space that finally felt like mine again. Not the old version. Not the one trying to prove something to Lorraine or chase after the echo of Tessa's perfect reflection. This version didn't need applause. Or approval. Or any seat at someone else's table. I didn't need to be chosen. I had already chosen myself. That night, after I closed up the studio, I walked Arya home with the stroller wheels clicking softly against the sidewalk. The sky was blushing with the last hint of sunlight. We passed the park where a girl with pink shoes was feeding breadcrumbs to pigeons while her father watched from a bench. I smiled at them. They smiled back. At home, after dinner and a bath filled with laughter and splashes, I rocked Arya in the nursery, her cheek pressed against my collarbone. Her hair still smelled like lavender baby shampoo. She was asleep before the second verse of the lullaby, her breathing deep and even. I stayed there a while, just holding her, thinking about everything it had taken to get to this room, this quiet, this moment. About how many times I had made myself smaller to make others more comfortable. How often I had tried to explain myself to people who never listened. But no one could take this from me now. Not the studio. Not Arya. Not the peace I had found in the mess. There was no perfect ending. No cinematic applause or sweeping declarations. Just a woman and her child and the quiet knowledge that everything painful that had led here had finally fallen behind. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting to be let in. I was already home. If you've ever been expected to carry someone else's weight to smile while being erased, I'd love to hear your story. Camille is listening. And so am I. Hi ChatGPT.